The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our third Thursday webinar. I'm Margot Hoffman, and I'm with the Partnership for Excellence, and we're very excited to have Kay Kendall with us today. Before we get started, just a couple things. There is a handout in the control panel of the presentation that you're seeing today. And we are also recording this presentation. So if you want to view it later, you'll be able to have access to it. Our agenda for the day is we have a few announcements to make, and then we will introduce our speaker. We'll have today's session, and then we'll allow time for questions, and then introduce our next webinar. Just a reminder, all of our programs that are hosting this, which is the California Council for Excellence, MAPE, Oklahoma Quality, PIPEX, which is Partners in Performance Excellence Northwest, Quality New Mexico, SWAY, and TPE have events throughout the year. And we share those on our website. So please go to our websites on a regular basis so you can see what events are happening and you can join us. There is one event I want to share with you that the Partnership for Excellence is holding, and that is a application writing web series, and it starts on Wednesday. So if you're interested in joining that, you can contact me. I also want to thank all of our organizational members. We couldn't do the work that we do if it weren't for the organizational members that support us. So thank you to all of our organizational members for allowing us to help organizations cultivate performance excellence within their organizations. I would now like to introduce our presenter, who is Kay Kendall. Kay is a friend to TPE for many, many years. She has more than 20 years of experience as a quality executive, leading large-scale change initiatives in various industries. She is the CEO of Baldrige Coach, and she works with organizations on their journey to performance excellence. She served on the panel of judges for the National Baldrige Program for 3 years, and she is a master examiner with them. She's also a master examiner and team leader for the ACA Quality Award and was a judge for the VA Carey Award and a judge for PIPEX, one of our regional programs. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Kay, and we're going to get started here. Whoops. Just a second here.
So, Margot, I'm not seeing your screen.
We're seeing your screen, so you're good.
Okay. But that's not the right presentation, so we're not good.
Okay.
Let me see if I can. Here it is.
There you go. You're good to go.
Okay. Excuse me. So now let me switch to full screen. Perfect. How's that working?
Very good. Looks great.
All right, great. So the objectives for this session are to compare and contrast leading versus lagging indicators and really look at how can we identify leading indicators for common outcome measures, because it's only through your leading indicators that you could really make sustainable improvement. And then we're going to talk about how you can conduct a metrics assessment of the metrics that you use to run your organization. So one of the things that I think is pretty interesting is to look at aviation as an analogy for running organizations. And in aviation, there are 3 priorities, and they go in this order: aviate, keep the plane flying; navigate, determine the destination and chart the course; and communicate, because you aren't the only one up there and you may impact others. Now, in the analogy with the organization, you need to aviate. You need to keep the organization in business. You need to navigate. You need to set the direction, develop the roadmap, and define the journey. And you definitely aren't the only one up there because you impact others, customers, employees, and stakeholders. So let's take the analogy just a little bit further. I've seen some organizations really get wrapped around the axle, using a different analogy, in their measurement systems, and they overcomplicate their measurement systems. They put in very sophisticated business intelligence systems, and in fact, that's way more than they need to keep the organization running. So if you take the analogy further, let's look at the instrument panel in an airplane as a representation of your measurement system. And it should only be as complex as needed to keep your organization aloft. Now, let's compare a dashboard versus an instrument panel. A car's dashboard has useful information, but until very recently, it didn't provide any indicators about other traffic or how well you're staying in your lane. But a pilot can fly blind using only the instrument panel to fly the plane and safely land it. So what kind of measurement system do you have? Do you have a measurement system that gives you information about the world around you as well as what you're doing internally? Or do you have only a dashboard? So let's talk again about an airplane cockpit. One of the interesting things is that the most important information necessary for the safe flight of an aircraft is right in front of the pilot's view. Okay, and that's so that everything that needs to be attended to keep the airplane in the air is readily accessible, readily visible. There are also systems that frequently require actions, and the displays make it easy to see when the action is needed. But if you ever look above a pilot, you'll see that there are other systems that generally operate within a normal range, and they're displayed overhead. And what that does is it minimizes the distraction for what needs to be managed unless an alarm indicates there's an exception. How does your measurement system compare? Do you keep what's most important visible in front of you, in front of your employees so that they know what's important, they know how the organization is doing? Or is it cluttered with a lot of useless measures or measures that don't change very frequently, and therefore they just wind up being a distraction? So there are different ways of displaying metrics to drive improvement and accountability. The scoreboards, dashboards, and drill down, and then line of sight visuals. And we're going to talk about every one of these and the differences and how they can be used to help your organization really improve. Now, a scoreboard is was a concept of the ballot scorecard was introduced in 1994 by Dr. Robert Kaplan and Dr. David Norton of Harvard University. And what they did was they created a framework for measuring organizational performance using a more balanced set of measures. Traditionally, companies had used only short-term financial performance as a measure of success. The ballot scorecard added additional non-financial strategic measures to the mix in order to better focus on long-term success. And the system has continued to evolve over the years, and it's now considered a fully integrated strategic management system. So having a visible scoreboard allows everyone in the organization to know how well we're doing. But I love this quote, simplicity is the ultimate sophistication, by Leonardo da Vinci. So again, you want to use measures and visual displays of measures that are only as sophisticated as needed to depict what's going on in your organization. Just keep focus on the purpose of the system and allow the displays to help you with that. So here's a scorecard format from a healthcare system. And there are several things I really like about it. It displays balance across multiple important areas. So you see there's measures on culture, measures on patient safety, measures on clinical quality, and finally at the bottom line, financial health. It also shows their performance against a benchmark in their market or sector, which is a good thing to be able to provide context for how you're doing. It identifies their fiscal year targets, and it color codes the performance at each quarter. And so anyone at a glance can tell what areas need attention. Now, sometimes you'll have what we call a dashboard, or it's the instrument panel. And at the top, you might see critical gauges, things that change on a regular basis. So things like patient safety, rehospitalization rates, census. But then at the bottom, you have something that's more of a static display, and those are just warning lights. Those are things that change infrequently and only need to sound an alarm when a threshold is not being met. Now, here's another example of a dynamic dashboard, but I'll tell you, I find it not easy to interpret at a glance. One of the problems is the different use of chart types. So it's not easy to go from one chart to the next and readily be able to interpret what it's telling me. Another is the lack of a directional arrow telling me which is better performance. And the color coding isn't explained, and it's not intuitively obvious. So again, one of the things you want to do when you're looking at dashboards or scorecards is test it with some of the people in your organization who didn't develop it, and see if they can explain it to you and if it makes sense to them and in their job. So something else that's really important around visual displays is a cascade of your goals to your actions to your tactics. When I worked for Allied Signal Aerospace, which is now Honeywell, we developed these goal trees, and they cascaded major objectives and goals down to every employee. And moving from left to right, starting with the top level objective, leaders could see what actions were needed to accomplish the top level objective, the how, and the who was assigned the ownership for accomplishing the objective. The other thing was that moving right to left, going from the tactics back up to the top level objective, employees could see how the work that they do contributes to the accomplishment of an important objective. So for all the years that Larry Bossidy served as the CEO of Allied Signal, he always had 3 top objectives. The second and third ones would change, but the first one was always make the numbers. In other words, hit your financial targets. You can imagine how tough it is to get frontline workers to see how they contributed to that objectives, or in many cases, even to care. We found the goal tree to be very effective about that. I was at the engines division in Phoenix on the second shift, checking to see how well this was working at communicating to frontline employees. I asked the operator working in the small gear cell how he helped make the numbers, and he took me to their break room where they had a similar goal tree that was posted, and he walked me through it right to left. And so he was absolutely clear on how the work he did helped the company make the numbers. So this is a really powerful tool. We have another client, Mary Greeley Medical Center, that uses a concept called Big Dot Goals. And what they do with those is they have 4 Big Dot goals, again, similar to a balanced scorecard. And what they do is then they cascade those goals down to every employee in the organization who finds a way to show how the work that they do contributes to one or more of those Big Dot goals. So for instance, we were out there helping them prepare for their Baldrige site visit, and we walked into a staff meeting where the environmental services folks were meeting with their supervisors. And they were trying to decide how they could impact one of the Big Dot goals. Well, one of the Big Dot goals had to do with reducing patient harm. And so the housekeeping staff said they could influence that by doing a thorough and effective cleaning and sanitizing of every room for the patients and any equipment that was used. The maintenance workers surprised us because they figured out that they could contribute to the Big Dot goal of improve inpatient safety. And the rationale was, we're already in the patient's room. Why don't we stop before we leave and say, I have the time. Is there anything else I can do for you? And many times it wasn't a clinical request. It was something like getting a water pitcher refilled or a fresh box of tissues. So it was something that the maintenance people could do. And if it was a clinical request, they could always reach out to one of the caregivers on the floor and ask for their help. So what's your role in data analysis? Lots of times senior leaders aren't the ones crunching the numbers. You have somebody else on your staff who does that. But you make critical decisions based on the accuracy of the data, the timeliness, and the reliability, as well as the quality of the analyses to ensure the validity of your conclusions. So you're making important decisions, and each of these attributes are things that you need to be aware of. Okay, I lived in Arizona for 17 years. It was not uncommon to find a sign on the road that said no services next 78 miles. Now, that's kind of a scary thing when you're driving in a deserted, desolate, hot Sonoran desert. And so in that case, I wanted an effective gas gauge as my leading indicator versus the lagging indicator of running out of gas. So here's the problem with lagging indicators. You often get caught by surprise, i.e. running out of gas. A really, really bad response to a survey. They reflect problems or dissatisfaction that have already occurred, and you can't do much about it. It's hard to reverse the perception or harm that was created, and sometimes it's costly, and oftentimes it's just impossible to reverse that perception. Lagging indicators are frequent causes of low morale in organizations. And the reason is your employees, for instance, are aware of the reality before the survey results come back. They're often frustrated with the lack of equipment, supplies, training, or even existing policies. When I changed industry a few times, the first employees I talked with were our customer support people. The things they couldn't do or say yes to were reflections of broken systems internally or policies that needed revisiting. And finally, the problem with lagging indicators is they don't leverage the ideas and innovations of your employees. So what's a good leading indicator? It's strongly correlated with the lagging indicator in question. It's predictive in nature. It's as far upstream as possible, and it's something that you can take action on before that lagging indicator has occurred. So let's take a look at these. Are these lagging or leading indicators? Margot is monitoring chat, so I'm going to ask you to type in your responses. Are any of these leading indicators?
As Kay said, if you'd like to type it in the chat, we can share your responses.
Do we have any participants, Margot?
We don't, but I'm going to participate. I would say that senior leader rounding would be maybe a leading indicator.
What would it be a leading indicator of as an outcome?
Well, it depending on how you use it, if senior leaders are capturing input from whether it's customers or employees that they're rounding with, so they know things exactly when they're happening rather than after the fact in a survey, they could possibly take action on that immediately.
Okay. Is there anything else that's a leading indicator in this list?
Someone put attendance could be leading.
I agree with that. I think that anytime you are looking at voluntary activities and people participate in those, that's an indicator of some employee engagement or customer engagement. So I think that's a good leading indicator. The other ones up here, though, are traditionally lagging indicators. They're the outcomes of your processes, and by the time you have the data, it's already occurred. So let's take a look at.
Just a couple other comments. So one person put survey deficiencies if we aren't getting participation. And another one put customer satisfaction. And I guess I could see, depending on where you're gathering that customer satisfaction, might make a difference.
That's true. But if it's an actual outcome, like, you know, when you go to a restaurant or you go to a hotel and then you get a survey after the fact, that's a lagging indicator. You can't really get any kind of help in improving your satisfaction once it's already occurred. So let's talk about what could some leading indicators be for customer satisfaction rating. What could you look at as a leading indicator?
Again, you can type those in the chat or the question box if you have some ideas for that.
Put yourself in the position of a consumer. What are some of the things that are predictive of how you will rate your transaction with an organization?
We had someone from healthcare say patient rounding could be a leading indicator for customer satisfaction.
Okay. What else?
Appointments in a timely manner.
Wait time is often a good leading indicator for many outcome indicators of satisfaction. How about handoffs? How often is your question resolved with the first person you talk to? What about employee turnover? What would be a leading indicator of that?
Someone put claims completed successfully. I think that went with customer satisfaction.
Okay.
Complaints for employee turnover.
Okay.
I think in our last question we brought attendance could possibly be
okay.
Could be leading. Stay interviews.
Okay. Any others?
We don't have any others yet.
Okay, how about referrals when you have open positions? Do you have employees that refer friends or family? What about on-time product or service delivery? What's a leading indicator for that?
Time to completion.
Okay. How about your yield, your quality yield?
Okay, yeah. Good one.
Okay, market share. What's a leading indicator of market share?
I suppose if you attract new business, as you're right, right on time business. I don't know if I'm saying that right. Customer satisfaction could be an indicator of market share, a leading indicator. Someone put in.
Probably be a very strong leading indicator of dissatisfaction and losing market share. Okay, net profit. What about survey deficiencies? What would be a leading indicator for that? You do internal surveys? You know, one of the things that when I worked in manufacturing and we were ISO certified, we did a lot of internal surveys, mock surveys. And one of the things that we always said is, we don't care how many deficiencies we get on an internal survey because that only makes us better. but we do care about our external ones. So if we have a very effective internal survey process, that can be a leading indicator of how well we'll do on an external survey.
We have
Margot,
a
I
few.
know you work in
Yeah, just a
manufacturing
second.
too.
Okay, we have a few. We have internal audits, safety rounds, low participation rate, and percentage of responders.
Oh, good.
So got a few for that one.
Those are all good ones.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say among survey deficiencies, another leading indicator is if you track near misses. And you have to really make sure that you have the right culture that encourages people to share when they've had a near miss, when that they don't feel like they're going to get blamed, they're going to get help. Probably one of our favorite examples is one of our long-term care clients, Mountain Valley, that also won the Baldrige Award in 2016. Mary Ruth, who was the executive director, came in on a Monday morning, and she had a CNA come into her office and tell her about a near miss that she had had over the weekend in trying to transfer a patient. And she admitted that she hadn't mastered the transfer process and technique. And rather than be, fortunately, there were no injuries to either the employee or the resident. But one of the things that Mary Ruth realized was if this one CNA was unclear about and uncomfortable performing this patient transfer maneuver, there were probably other people that had the same issue but weren't feeling confident about bringing it up. So they did in-services and trained all of their employees, every single one, not just caregivers, on this patient transfer. And the reason was the patient transfer really required two people to be done safely. This way, if the CNA was working on a shift where maybe there wasn't another CNA handy, even the business office manager knew how to do a patient transfer. So anybody could reach out to anybody else in the organization and ask for help with the transfer.
Great example. I was going to share. Sometimes it sounds counterintuitive, but I've had situations where you have a customer complaint or a customer issue, and if you've responded to it quickly and you resolve it quickly for them, sometimes it actually ends up improving your relationship with the customer and resulting in better survey results in the future.
You're right, and I've read studies about that, and part of the reason is as a consumer, now I know I've experienced a problem and I've seen how well you've resolved it for me, so I have increased confidence in you.
Yes. Yes.
So one of the things when we talk about leading and lagging indicators is we're going to talk about root cause analysis. And I'm not a big fan of the 5 whys analysis because it assumes a linearity, that everything happens as a result of just a single event that preceded it. And that's really not correct. It assumes a single corrective action is needed and is always reactive. So one of the things that I like to do is look at things as a perfect storm. If you've ever seen the movie or read the book, you'll realize that the perfect storm required a conflagration of events that created the disaster. One single event would not have caused that disaster. So one of the things that you might try to do is look at a fishbone diagram as what are some of the causes of customer dissatisfaction for the dining experience. And so you'll see that if you look at methods, manpower, machinery, materials. Now, I have to give you a caution. Manpower is never about a person, an individual. It's never about naming a name for somebody. It's just all the things related to the people part of a process. Now, what would you do, though, if you had this fishbone diagram? What would you start on next? And how would you know? Any ideas?
We haven't gotten any ideas. Oh, wait, hold on. We had some comments on causes like dirty utensils and rude servers.
Oh. Okay, well, let's just talk about this for a second, because this is a great way of engaging your employees. Who knows better than the people closest to the process? So in this case, I would gather up the employees who are part of the dining experience, all the way from dishwashers to servers to cooks. Anybody that's involved in this, maybe even involve some of the customers of the dining experience, and ask them to prioritize based on their knowledge of the process. Now, it's not quite an exact science, but usually these are the people that have the best insights into what's really going on in the process.
And we did have someone that said they would involve their frontline team for initial discussions, which goes along with what you just said, Kay.
That's great. So now let's go back to, how do you identify leading indicators? The best thing is to map the process and focus on any of the areas where you have regular rework, where you have handoffs, and identify the requirements at every step along the way. One of the things you can often find out is there are correlations. They may not indicate direct causality, but they can still be useful in being leading indicators. So let's talk about, this is a tool that we like to use. We call it a process description tool. And the sequence of the numbers are really important. So you want to start with, what's the name of the process? Okay, whoops, I just lost my, okay. Can you see my screen again now, Margot? Margot,
sorry,
can
I was
you see the
muted.
screen?
We can see your screen. I think
Okay.
you're back on the how do you identify leading indicators screen.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay. So again, sometimes you'll have correlations, but they're not causes, but they can still provide useful insights. So let me give you an example of, now this is I'm having technical difficulties. There it is. Okay. Of how we use this process description tool. As I mentioned, the steps are numbered in the right sequence. So one, you're going to create this process box, and I call them chunks. What are the main chunks in a process? Who's the customer? And so what's the output of the process? And then identify the customer of that process. Step 4 is, what's the last step? What's the handoff? And we'll walk through this in just a minute. Then what's the input? Some of you may use what's called a SIPOC, suppliers, inputs, process, outputs, customers. It's a very similar tool to this. And then you're going to list the sub-steps. Now, there's nothing magical about the 4 intermediate step boxes, but somewhere between 3 and 6 is a good number. Anything more detailed than that, you're going to get into the weeds. Anything like just 1 or 2 key steps, you're going to be at such a high level, you probably won't get useful information. So this is a process that it's actually based on a real example. Back in the mid 1990s, Marriott Hotels was getting very bad reviews on their guest check-in process. And what they planned on doing was chartering a team to go out and benchmark. And they assumed that the check-in was from the time a guest approached the front desk until they were handed a key. And this was just really a false understanding of the guest's experience of the check-in process. It really starts at the reservation. The reservation is where the customer's expectation of getting the right property, the right room, in the right location, and where the expectation is set for the guest. how many of you have ever received a key that when you schlep all your stuff up to your room, you discover that the key doesn't unlock the door? And so just having a key handed to you at the front desk is not part of the guest check-in experience in a positive way. So if you look at the box 3, you're going to see some of customer requirements on getting satisfaction with guest check-in. Also want to point out that this is a very useful tool if you're writing an application, because if you'll notice up here in the process description is a description of your approach. Down here is your deployment. In this box, we have evidence of your learning, your evaluation and improvement of the process. And down at the bottom, you have how does this process relate to other processes or systems in your organization? And then there's a secret box, which is right up here, the related measures. So now you have an added start on the results that you might use to display in category 7, demonstrating the effectiveness of this process. And the little decoder ring down here is the O that's an outcome indicator, and the I is an in-process or leading indicator. So you could actually predict your guest satisfaction by monitoring these leading indicators or in-process indicators before you ever distribute a survey to the guest after their stay. So what are some of the next steps? You really want to involve employees in gathering data for the in-process measures. Determine which of those are correlated with the outcome measure. And sometimes you'll pick a measure to monitor and then discover that, in fact, it really doesn't move the needle either way. So you want to get rid of that measure because you don't want to monitor something that isn't having an impact. You want to look at initiating improvement projects that correlate to those sub-processes. And really engage your employees in tracking the data for both the in-process and the outcome measures so that they have a sense of ownership for it. The other thing you can do if you have in-process measures or leading indicators is you can start to take corrective action even before you have your outcome measure. So let's talk about some other benefits of leading indicators. It helps you focus on what's really important to deliver the expected outcomes. And I have a little mantra that when I was the head of quality in several organizations, I used to say, I want to eliminate the excuses. So if things were getting in the way of people being able to do their job right, I wanted to eliminate those. But I also wanted to challenge them if they were blaming causes on poor quality that really didn't have anything to do with the issue. So this is a real life example. When I worked in aerospace, one of our divisions was reporting extreme customer dissatisfaction over our delivery performance. And for those of you who aren't from manufacturing, lead time is the quoted time to deliver a product once the order is placed. So for instance, an aircraft component might have a quoted lead time of 7 weeks. And that lead time has been calculated to include ordering any supplies, scheduling time in manufacturer assembly and test, any time for inspections, and also for delivery. And there may be a slight buffer built in, but in most manufacturing industries, the competitive pressure is reducing lead time. I'm going to check in with Margot on that because I know that was her career for a long time too.
Absolutely. Yes, I totally agree.
And what I kept hearing from the people involved in this division was they were blaming it on the sales department and the suppliers. They were saying that sales was accepting too many orders inside of lead time. In other words, they were promising the customer a faster delivery than we knew was possible. Whoops. And they were also blaming the suppliers for not delivering their part of the product. So what we did was, first, we had to resolve an operational definition. the customer, in this case it was Boeing, and our definition of on-time delivery were not the same. What we said was if a customer ordered 10 widgets and we ordered 9 of those 10 widgets at the promised delivery date, we counted that at 90%. Boeing said, no, that's a 0%, because they looked at fill rate. If they ordered 10 widgets, they needed all 10 to complete an aircraft. So if we delivered only 9, they still couldn't complete that aircraft, so it was a 0%. So that getting that agreement on the definition was a huge first step in being able to understand the customer's dissatisfaction. Then what we did was we investigated the last 100 sales order that missed their delivery commitment. In other words, they were late to the customer. And then again, like I said, I try to take out the excuses. Out of those 100, only 13 of the orders were accepted inside of lead time. So 87 of those orders had every chance of being delivered on time based on the commitment that was made to the customer. Of those 87, only 35 had late deliveries by suppliers. So that means we had 52 late orders that the sales people didn't promise too soon, the suppliers delivered on time. But of those 52, we found out that only 26 were started on schedule in manufacturing and assembly. And so one of the things that this analysis did was it helped take out the excuses and really focus on where the bottlenecks were. So one of the things we discovered is that we actually had a concern if our suppliers improved their delivery performance, because we showed that we couldn't produce according to our lead times, and we weren't going to be able to make our commitments. And so we really defined an algorithm based on these leading indicators that predicted our on-time delivery. And that was before we even converted to the Boeing's fill rate metric of 100% of the widgets, 100% on time for each order. So one of the things that I promised you is I wanted to talk about how do you assess your metrics. And I'd like for you to take just a minute and, using this scorecard, look at how well your performance measures meet these objectives, and then come up with a score. I'll give it just a couple of minutes, and then if you can put your total score in the chat box, that would be great. Are we getting any inputs, Margot?
We have not yet. Okay, I think we got our first one. So we had someone that got 8.
Okay. Thank you for your honesty.
$19.
So the general rule of thumb is that a score of less than 18 means that your measurement system is not helping you effectively and efficiently manage your organization. Score of 32 means it's a strength in your organization, your measurement system. And anything in between says you've got some opportunities for improvement. And I would ask you to really focus on each one of the questions individually, because they all have a component of making your measurement system more effective. I'll give you an example of, does your measurement system drive the desired behaviors? Oftentimes metrics can have unintended consequences. So I was the VP of corporate quality in a high-tech organization where the CEO incentivized me on the quality performance of our products at our customers. So not our end of line quality, but our out of box quality. So when it first arrived at the customer and was installed, what was our out of box quality performance? However, he incentivized the VP of engineering for the number of new products introduced per year. Now, Margot, can you see the flaw in that measure?
Yes, I do.
What it did was it incentivized the engineering VP to just flood the market with new products without any regard to were they designed for manufacturability,
Mm-hmm.
were they designed to meet the requirements in the marketplace, could they be manufactured and installed in a way that allowed them to work correctly. It was just the sheer number of new products.
Yes.
So take a look at your measurement system and see if you also have some cases where, despite your best intentions, your measures are actually driving the wrong behaviors.
So the person who had 8 said actually it was 38. So they had a little bit of a typo. So they're one of those higher, their metrics are well aligned, it looks like.
That's great. Okay, let's talk about chartering process improvement teams. What I see a lot of times in organizations is teams are chartered around improving an outcome measure. The problem is there's not an interim measure that's a leading indicator so that the team's progress can be monitored earlier in the process. So if you think about our case study in manufacturing about improving on-time delivery, yes, that was a noble and important outcome measure to improve, but that wouldn't tell us whether or not the team was being successful. So we had a couple of leading indicators we could have used. We could have used sales accepted inside of lead time and try to drive that down to 0 so that we only accepted orders at or greater than lead time. Another one would have been our supplier delivery performance and have a team working on that. Now, can you see how having these leading indicators allows you to charter very specific teams rather than one large team trying to eat the whole elephant? We also had the issue of orders not getting started on time in manufacturing, which is probably another whole process. And finally, we had the problem of even when orders were started on time in manufacturing, they still didn't make their scheduled commitment date. So what was going on? What were the barriers in those processes? So now I'm going to turn it back over to Margot and also see if there's any questions or comments people have. This is my contact information. I love metrics. I'm a metric nerd. So if you want to talk about metrics sometime, feel free to call me or send me a chat. And then I also have a slide that has some references and resources. And I find all of these to be very useful in either establishing the right metrics or establishing ways to display them in a way that energizes people and gets them involved in improvement, which is what you really want metrics to do for you. Okay, back to you, Margot.
Thank you, Kay. Great presentation, a lot of great tips. If anyone has any questions, you can type them in the question box and I will share them with Kay. So we'll just pause for a second and see if there are any questions. Kay, one question is, when you're working with an organization on quality improvement efforts, do you focus on leading or lagging indicators?
We focus first on the lagging indicators because those are generally what get the senior leaders' attention. but then quickly we try to drill back down into leading or predictive indicators. Because like I've said repeatedly in this presentation, you can't improve by focusing only on a lagging indicator. That just tells you what has happened. That doesn't give you insights into what could happen.
Great. And I think this next question probably is a good segue, but what is difficult about finding those leading indicators?
I think the difficulty is oftentimes people, they just brainstorm around the outcome indicator and they don't do the heavy lifting of diagramming the process. And I mean, again, if you look at that Marriott guest check-in example, I love that example again because it's real life. It was a problem they were facing. Had they just gone with their assumption that they knew that from the customer's point of view, the check-in process was arriving at the front desk and getting a key, they would have missed all of the opportunities to make that process much more effective and much more satisfying to the guests, as well as engaging more people. I mean, when their assumption was it was all the front desk staff's fault. They were the only people that could influence the satisfaction. But when they really understood the process, it went all the way back to the people that were making and accepting reservations.
Yeah, it's you gotta look at the whole sort of value stream of everything.
Right.
There was a question about the recording. We have recorded this, and we will send an email out to everyone with a link to give us your input in a survey and also a link to the recording. Well, we have no more questions, so I'm going to take back the screen. Thank you so much, Kay, for sharing your knowledge and experience. You had great examples from many different industries. So thank you so much for sharing the concepts along with examples of real life situations that support them. So we really appreciate your time today and sharing your knowledge.
Thank you, Margot. I always enjoy working with TPE and you.
Great, thank you. So our next Third Thursday webinar is on leveraging culture, and it's focusing on a systematic approach to quality. So leveraging your culture to do that. We have Michael O'Brien, who is quite an expert when it comes to culture in organizations, and he's going to apply that to approaches to quality. So we hope you can join us. Here's the link to register, and when we send that email out afterwards, we will include that link in it. So on behalf of all of our programs that are supporting these Third Thursday webinars, thank you for joining us. If you're not on the Baldrige journey yet and you want to get started, here is the contact information for the various programs that are engaged with these webinars. If you're from another state or region that's not covered by these programs, you can reach out to me and I can connect you with the appropriate program. So thank you everyone for joining us. Have a great rest of your week, and hopefully we will see you next month. Bye everyone.
Bye.